Welcome back to Historical Context. Today we continue our series on the colonies during the English Commonwealth. Today we return to Massachusetts Bay, where we last left off in the year 1655. That May, the General Court met and elected John Endicott governor once again. This would be Endicott's fifth time serving as colonial governor. The first issue that the court tackled was the shortchanging of colonists. Apparently, traders from Connecticut were bringing wood and corn to the Massachusetts Bay for sale. These traders would measure out the quantities, but after their purchase, colonists would go to verify the measurements and find out they were down by as much as 5%. So the court authorized the hiring of men to act as intermediaries and to count out the quantity of goods being traded. So the Massachusetts Bay Colony was not to be kept short from Connecticut. The militia was also called up to repair forts in the colony. It was also established that the colonial governor would live in or within 5 miles of Boston. So Boston is really becoming the center of influence here in the colony and in New England. The case of John Gifford, which we discussed the last time we talked about Massachusetts Bay, was dismissed when the plaintiffs failed to appear. Gifford's rights as a citizen would be restored later in the same session. Joseph Jenks was granted a 7-year patent on an engine that better cut grass. Now that got my attention because an engine in the year 1655, quite interesting. Joseph Jenks was a swordsmith or a bladesmith. He founded the Saugus Iron Mill. Jenks had received the first known patent in America back in 1646 for a water-driven machine that would make blades. In this case, it appears as if Jenks had found a better blade to cut brush. Jenks also made fire engines. And fire engines back in these days were carts, heavy carts that carried water. In November, the court met and decided to send a letter to Oliver Cromwell and to send Captain John Leverett over to England to press the colony's rights. John Gifford was awarded £300 for being wrongfully accused. Wow, what a turn of events. In 1656, the court met and re-elected John Endicott. Charles Chauncey, the second president of Harvard College, preached to the general court. The court banned the selling of horses to the natives. They also ordered improvements for all spinners. Those are the women that spun for clothing. And this was likely due to the scarcity of clothing. The court requested that spinners work 30 weeks per year and spin 3 pounds of materials per week under penalty of 12 pence for every pound short. Whoa. The court also amended its military orders to no longer allow the arming of Negroes or natives. John Clark's patent on his wood-burning stove was extended to the remainder of his life, and this was a different John Clark than the Baptist preacher from Rhode Island. Same spelling, 2 different people. The court also declared the expansion of its patent to Exeter, New Hampshire. The court also accepted the surrender of lands from 2 men near Dover and Strawberry Bank, New Hampshire. The court granted those men smaller amounts of land in exchange for their surrender. And let's not forget the Mason family is also due a settlement as well. The court officially released John Gifford from prison and moved to the trial of Ann Hibbins. Let's have a look. The magistrates not receiving the verdict of the jury in Mrs. Hibbins' case, having been on trial for witchcraft, it came and fell, of course, to the general court. Mrs. Hibbins was called forth, appeared at the bar, the indictment against her was read, to which she answered not guilty, and was willing to be tried by God and this court. The evidences against her was read, the parties witnessing being present, her answers considered on, and the whole court being met together by their vote determined that Ann Hibbins is guilty of witchcraft, according to the bill of indictment found against her by the jury of life and death. The governor in open court pronounced sentence accordingly, declaring she was to go from the bar to the place from which she came, and from thence to the place of execution, and there to hang until she was dead. Ann Hibbins was executed on June 19th. She was a 22-year-old widow whose late husband had made poor business decisions, leaving her impoverished after his death. She was described as a very quarrelsome woman with her neighbors. What's shocking in all of this is that her brother was former Governor Richard Bellingham, who did not come to her aid during her trial. Ann Hibbins' story of poverty and possibly mental illness ended sadly. In the same general court session, a letter was received by Oliver Cromwell requesting that the colony transplant some of its residents to Jamaica. The court then moved on to deal with the Quaker movement. A group of Quakers had arrived in Plymouth earlier that year. Reports of Quakers throughout the colonies were becoming evident as we were reading the primary sources. We talked about this in Maryland as well. The Quaker movement is traced to a man by the name of George Fox. Fox was born in England in 1624 and was thought to have a very religious upbringing. In 1643, during the English Civil War, Fox was driven by an inner voice to begin traveling and discussing his religious beliefs with other clergy. Fox believed that God lived in the hearts of his obedient people and that believers could follow their inner guide versus strict biblical scripture. Fox also believed that women could preach, which was a vast distinction from other religions popping up during this time. By the early 1650s, he had a small following, and they began to call themselves Friends. With his travels, he was imprisoned and whipped many times for blasphemy. In 1653, he was sentenced to death, but the English Parliament did not want to put a young man to death over religion. Fox even met Oliver Cromwell multiple times. In one case, he met in 1656, just as the Quakers were coming to America, to plead for leniency against his friends. And now, Quakers were coming to Massachusetts Bay. The colonists were no friendlier, calling the Quakers heretics and saying that they despised government, speak evil, and turn people away from their own faith. The court ordered it illegal for any ship or colonist to bring a Quaker into the colony. Violating this law would lead to fines and possibly imprisonment. As for the Quakers themselves, let's have a look at the writing. What Quakers soever shall arrive in this country from foreign parts, or come into this jurisdiction from any part adjacent, shall be forthwith committed to the house of correction, and at their entrance to be severely whipped, and by the master thereof be kept constantly to work, and none suffered to converse or speak with them during the time of their imprisonment, which shall be no longer than necessity requires. Anyone found in possession of Quaker literature would be ordered to pay £5 per book. Anyone who defends the Quaker beliefs would face fines for the first 2 offenses, then imprisonment for the third. Imprisonment being referred to here as a house of correction. In the same session, the court would fine Nicholas Upshaw £20 for speaking out in opposition to this very law. Then the court passes a law allowing the president and fellows of Harvard College to whip students as a punishment. In February of 1657, Mary Dyer was arrested in Massachusetts for Quakerism. She had been a friend of Anne Hutchinson's, who had endured the label of being a heretic when she herself, like Anne Hutchinson, suffered an abnormal birth. She had accompanied Roger Williams and John Clark to England in 1652 when she got caught up in the Quaker movement. So this is a follower of Anne Hutchinson's who later goes to Rhode Island with Roger Williams, then goes to England with him and John Clark and gets caught up in the Quaker movement. So now she's a Quaker. Her husband in Rhode Island was able to negotiate her release with Governor Endicott. The May General Court that year renewed John Endicott's term as governor, so he continues on, and mainly dealt with the handing out of acreage left and right. There are grants in this court session for acreage all over the place, so the colony was clearly growing. There was also a complaint filed from Wells, that's the town in southern Maine, and they were complaining about the jurisdiction of neighboring towns. The matter ends up being forwarded to Oliver Cromwell. It's not mentioned in this session, but Massachusetts Bay is throwing out Quakers left and right as they show up. Some end up in Plymouth, some end up in Rhode Island, and some end up in New Netherland. In October, the court met again and added more to the Quaker laws, so there's more restrictions. The penalty for bringing or entertaining any Quakers in the colony directly or indirectly was increased to £100. Prison time was also added for repeat violators. As for the Quakers themselves, let's have a look. That if any Quaker or Quakers shall presume, after they have once suffered what the law require, to come into this jurisdiction, every such male Quaker shall for the first offense have one of his ears cut off, and be kept at work in the house of correction till he could be sent away at his own charge. The law goes on. And for the second offense shall have his other ear cut off and kept at the house of correction, as aforesaid, and every woman Quaker that has suffered the law here that shall presume to come into this jurisdiction shall be severely whipped and kept at the house of correction at work till she be sent away at her own charge. And so also for her coming again she shall be alike used as aforesaid. And for every Quaker, he or she that shall a third time again offend, they shall have their tongues bored through with a hot iron, and kept at the house of correction close to work till they be sent away at their own charge. Whipping, imprisonment, hard labor, a hot iron pierced through your tongue. That's the price for being a Quaker in Massachusetts Bay. In May of 1658, the General Court added to the Quaker laws yet again. These laws focused on imposing similar punishments for those who attended Quaker meetings. The court also cracked down on a regulation of swine as, quote, many children are exposed to great dangers of loss of life or limb. So swine was becoming a dangerous problem in Massachusetts Bay. The court ordered the hiring of local enforcers to enforce the regulation of swine. John Gifford was back in court fighting as an attorney on behalf of his client, the ironworks that he was previously accused of defrauding. The October General Court session there in 1658 passed more laws against Quakers. The law punished Quakers with banishment and execution if they returned. The law is rumored to have passed by a vote of 12 to 11. The month prior to this, Quakers Christopher Holder, John Copeland, and a third man had their right ears cut off. Reverend John Norton was hired to identify and discuss errors in the Quaker movement. 6 Quakers were then banished by the court and sentenced to death if they returned. In May of 1659, the General Court met again, and once again John Endicott was renewed as governor. In this session, the law switched from Quakerism to something else. Let's have a look at the writing. For preventing disorders arising in several places within this jurisdiction, by reason of some still observing such festivals as were superstitiously kept in other countries, to the great dishonor of God and offenses of others, it is therefore ordered by this court that whosoever shall be found observing any such day as Christmas or the like, either by forbearing of labor, feasting, every such person shall pay for every such offense 5 shillings as a fine to the country. This would become known as the penalty for keeping Christmas. A penalty for playing cards and dice was also passed into law. A group of colonists again were found guilty of being Quakers and banished from the colonies, under penalty of death if they return. There seems to be no mention in the writings of the tumultuous times coming upon England in 1659. But in October, William Robinson, Marmaduke Stevenson, and Mary Dyer were brought before the court for violating the Quaker law and returning after banishment. Oh boy, let's have a look at the writing. After a full hearing of what the prisoners could say for themselves, it was put to the question whether William Robinson, Marmaduke Stevenson, and Mary Dyer, who have been convicted for Quakers and banished this jurisdiction on pain of death, should be put to death according to the laws provided in this case. The court resolved this question on the affirmative, and the governor, in open court, declared the sentence: "You shall go from hence to the place from whence you came, and from thence to the place of execution, and there hang till you be dead." Death by hanging for being Quakers. Upon a plea from Mary Dyer's son in Rhode Island, the court grants her a reprieve and allows her 48 hours to leave the colony. The court issued a statement justifying their position against the Quakers. It's lengthy. It's a lengthy statement, and I'm going to try to have that statement placed on the docket for Friday's episode, a special episode this Friday. If it shows up, then I will have gotten it done. If not, we'll have to wait. On October 27th, 1659, William Robinson and Marmaduke Stevenson are executed in Boston. In November, the colony whipped Edward Norton for accompanying Quakers. They also imprisoned 10 others for being Quakers. The decade ends with this crackdown on Quakerism, and it appears to be at its peak while the Commonwealth collapses abroad. Next week, we'll go to Connecticut and see if they're dealing with some of these very same issues or if there's something different going on. We'll talk about that next time on Historical Context.